Hi, my name is Sean Fletcher, and I am the broker owner of the Remax Oceanside office here in Jaco Beach, Costa Rica. And I'm also the owner of the master franchise for Remax Costa Rica. I've been doing real estate for over 20 years in this country, and one of our major pain buttons is when it comes to financing. And you can get financing as a foreigner from a local bank, but it is so painful. They tell you it's going to take 30 days, it ends up taking 90 days. You're lucky to get someone who can speak to you in English. And then once you do get a loan, you're going to have an adjustable rate mortgage. There's no ceiling, so it can keep going up and up and up. And also, there's going to be a large prepayment penalty. So I'm sitting here with Zach, and he is the CEO and founder of Second Street Mortgage, and he is here to hopefully alleviate our pain button. So Zach, I'd like to ask you, what can Second Street Mortgage do for us?
Yeah, well, first of all, Sean, thank you so much for the introduction and for having me here today. We're really excited to be a great partner for Remax and for all of your clients in Costa Rica. So, a little bit about myself and Second Street. Like Sean said, I'm Zach, the founder and CEO of the company. And Second Street is really the first institutionally backed international mortgage lender for Americans in Costa Rica. We've brought the traditional US style mortgage from the States down to Costa Rica. We offer, really the 30-year fixed rate product that you know and love from the States. The process of getting a loan with us is exactly the same as what you would see back home. And all of the loan terms and structure are really what you'd be used to getting from a US mortgage lender. So we're really excited to have brought this product down to Costa Rica, really for the first time, to really be able to open up the market here and make it more accessible to a lot of people.
That's great. So, yeah, I mean, if we're not doing loans with the local bank, we're dealing with loans with sellers. And sellers obviously don't want to play bank for 30 years. And so we're doing short term financing, 3, 5, 7 years with them. So, having the ability to find a 30-year fixed rate mortgage for our American clients is a game changer. So, I'd like you to talk a little bit about closing costs and how that's going to operate. I understand that when you do a mortgage with Second Street, it goes into a trust, and tell us how that works as far as the transfer tax and typical recording costs.
Yeah, absolutely. So the closing costs for a loan with Second Street are really not all that different if you're buying a new home than if you were to purchase a property in cash. So when you buy a property in cash in Costa Rica, you end up paying a few different closing costs. Typically, the biggest ones that you're paying are transfer taxes and stamps, which are about 2.5% of the value of your home. And then you also have a notary public fee, which in Costa Rica is usually around another, call it point and a quarter. So you're paying, around 3.25 points on the total value of your purchase to buy a property in cash in Costa Rica. When you buy a property with Second Street, even though Second Street charges an origination fee like any lender does in the US, your closing costs end up being significantly offset by savings that we help you realize on the transfer tax side. So when you do get a mortgage with Second Street, the way the structure works is very similar to getting a deed of trust in the United States, which is how most mortgages are done in states like Texas and California. And so what that means is when you purchase the property, title to the property will be transferred directly from the seller into a trust in Costa Rica that's managed by an independent trustee. And on that transfer, you as the client do not owe any transfer taxes or stamps, which is saving you 2.5% on the entire value of your home up front. And so when you look at the total closing costs of, buying cash versus getting a loan with Second Street, it ends up not being a very big difference. At our maximum LTV of about 70%, the incremental closing costs to buy with a loan is maybe only an additional point or so. So it ends up being I think a really affordable product, and it's a great tax savings for clients.
Yeah, so if I'm understanding it correctly, if I get a loan from Second Street, I don't pay the transfer tax and recording costs up front. I would only pay that once I pay off the note and that the title is transferred into my name or a corporation that I have. However, what if I sell the property before I pay off the note? Because typically in Costa Rica, the buyers pay the closing costs, right? So
Yep.
can it go directly from the trust to the new buyer, in which case I would never end up paying the transfer tax and recording costs?
Absolutely. Yes. So, like you said, if we're giving you a 30-year loan, right, or your client a 30-year loan,
Mm-hmm.
most people don't hold their home for 30 years. Most people hold the home for about 7 to 10 years, and they almost always sell their home before the mortgage is paid off 30 years later.
Absolutely.
And so when you go to sell your home, if it's in a trust with Second Street, title to the property will be transferred directly from the trust to the new buyer of the property, and the new buyer is the one who would pay transfer taxes in that scenario.
That's huge.
So you could end up, going your entire ownership period in that property without ever having to pay those transfer taxes and stamps.
Awesome. Now, for our American buyers, what other benefits would they have by securing a loan with a lender like yourself that are making payments in the United States? What other benefits might they have?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are really three main benefits to getting a mortgage with Second Street for American clients. The first, I think, is an affordability question. There's a lot of people who, if they're going to afford something in this market, they need to get access to financing. If you come into the market with $150,000, there really isn't anything that you can buy that you're going to want to own at that type of price point. But if you're able to leverage that as a down payment and you have a stable source of income, like you would need to get a mortgage in the States, now you can actually buy a property here. And this whole, really incredible market, and we think Costa Rica is an amazing investment opportunity as well, now becomes accessible when it wasn't before. I think the second benefit is more of a budget question. So for a lot of people, right now you can only buy what you can afford in cash. If you have $400,000 or so in cash, Costa Rica is not a discount market. That'll get you something, but it might not get you the luxury property that you're expecting. But if you're able to use that as a down payment and get a mortgage with Second Street, now you can buy a multi-million-dollar property using that as a 30% down payment.
Yep.
So your client can really expand their budget and get into the home that they actually want, not just the one that they have the cash on hand to buy. And then I think the third major benefit really comes down to taxes. And I'm talking about taxes in the United States. So, there's a reason why Mark Zuckerberg and Beyonce both have mortgages on their homes. It's because it's really the smart thing for them to do. So what are the actual tax advantages you realize using a mortgage? I think the first and one of the most important ones is savings on capital gains taxes in the US. If you're buying a property in Costa Rica, there's a good chance you may need to sell some assets in the US to be able to buy that home, right? And capital gains taxes in the US, depending on where you live on a large capital gain, could be from 25% all the way up to close to 40% if you're living in New York or California. And so you might have a huge tax bill to have to pay if you want to free up cash to buy a place in Costa Rica. For a lot of people, it's a non-starter. They don't want to have to pay that kind of premium, pay those kinds of taxes. Similar situation for clients who might need to withdraw money from a retirement account if they're going to buy a property in Costa Rica. I mean, you and your clients know that if you're withdrawing from a 401k or a traditional IRA, you have to treat those withdrawals as ordinary income. So if you need to buy a home for $1 million, you actually have to pull out almost $2 million from your 401k to be able to buy the place, because you're going to be taxed on income of $2 million. So you're going to have to pay $1 million in taxes and then have $1 million left over to buy the home, which is nuts. And we've actually recently, in the past month, saved a client from having to do that and saved this guy hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes.
Nice.
And then the last thing is all of the rules that apply to the deductibility of mortgage interest from your income in the US also apply to our Costa Rican loans. So if your home purchase would be eligible for the mortgage interest tax deduction under US rules, your loan with Second Street is as well. And for a lot of buyers, I mean, can amount to tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax savings a year.
Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about who are you, who's your team, what kind of experience do you have in this field, and who's your backing? Where is your money coming from these mortgages?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is as an institutional investor. So I spent my career working at a couple different hedge funds in New York. Most recently was an investor over at Elliott Management, which manages about $70 billion in capital. And I left that role in 2023 to start building Second Street. And since I started building the company, we've put together, I think, a really incredible team. Everybody's based in the US, except our head of business development, who's based here in Costa Rica. Our team, especially the guys that work with clients, Steve Sloiter, our head of lending operations, and Raj Ponya, who is our senior loan officer, both of them have decades of experience. They actually both started working in the mortgage industry together over 20 years ago. So they've been at this a long time. They're super experienced. We know how to make a loan. We know how to make the process super easy. Getting a loan with us is just like getting a loan back at home. It's fast, simple. It's a little different from getting a loan from a bank in Costa Rica. And then, how are we actually able to offer a 30-year fixed rate mortgage product in Costa Rica? In a market where I think there have been some other companies that have attempted to do this at various points in the past, those companies have had problems with their funding.
Yep.
That has sometimes resulted in negative outcomes for clients when your lender doesn't show up to closing with cash. That's obviously a big problem.
That's no bueno for us.
No bueno, no bueno indeed. And so Second Street is backed by a publicly listed financial institution in the US. They're a public mortgage REIT, and they operate with a $9 billion balance sheet. And not only have they partnered with Second Street to provide capital for us to make loans, they've actually also made an investment in the business. So they're actually an equity partner in our company. They're in this for the long haul. And if we approve a loan, it means we have the cash to fund it. There's no questions about it.
Awesome. Okay, Zach, I'd like you to tell us at what point should a buyer reach out to you to determine how much you're able to finance and hence what type of properties they're able to look at here in Costa Rica?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So our advice is that clients should really try to come talk to us as soon as possible in their home buying journey. Because before you actually start shopping for a home, you want to know what your budget is, right? So Second Street does fully underwritten, verified pre-approvals. What that means is before you start shopping for a home, come to us. You'll have an initial consultation with our loan officer, Raj. You'll ask all the questions that you have about getting a loan. If this is something that you're interested in pursuing, we'll send you our loan application. It takes about 15 minutes to fill out. You send us your documentation, all the usual stuff that a lender in the US would be asking for. And within about 24 hours, if you're eligible, we'll get back to you with a pre-approval letter. And in that letter, it's going to say, congratulations, you've been pre-approved for a loan with Second Street. Here's how much you're able to borrow. Now, as the buyer, you know exactly what your budget is because you know how much cash you have to use for a down payment, and you know how much you're able to borrow. So now your client and their agent have a solid budget that they can use to shop. So when they actually come down to Costa Rica, they want to look at a bunch of properties. You're not wasting your time. You're only looking at things that are in your budget range, you can afford, and that are going to make sense for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's fantastic because we can start sending listings ahead of their arrival to Costa Rica within their budget, and that pre-approval letter would help us with the sellers to say, hey, look, we've got someone pre-approved, exactly. And that makes them more excited to show the properties to us. So that's definitely very helpful for our clients.
Awesome.
Okay, so tell me, who is eligible for these loans with Second Street?
Yeah, it's generally pretty simple, and I think most of your clients will be eligible for a loan with us. The way that we've set up our guidelines, they're very broadly reflective of the same guidelines that you would see for getting a mortgage in the US. We use a lot of the same things. So who is eligible? First, right now, we're only lending to American citizens and permanent residents. So that does mean if you're, let's say, Canadian, but you have a US green card, you're eligible to get a loan for a second home or an investment property with us. Obviously, if you're a US passport holder, you're eligible. Mm-hmm. We can lend to people with all sorts of different types of income. You can have a salary job with a W-2, you could be retired, you could be self-employed. All of those things are fine as long as we're able to see your income on a tax return. We're able to use it to underwrite your loan. The loans that we do for a new purchase go up to 70% loan to value or a 30% down payment. And when we do a cash out refinance loan, on that we can go up to a 60% cash out on those types of properties.
Okay.
We lend against all sorts of different property types. It could be a single family home, it can be a condo, it can be a townhome. All of that works. We also don't discriminate by location in Costa Rica. So whether you have a client buying something up in the mountains or down by the beach, all of that's okay with us. I'd say we're generally pretty broad in what we're able to do.
Okay.
Unlike financial institutions in Costa Rica, we also don't discriminate by age. So the oldest person that we've ever pre-approved for a loan was 82 years old for a 30-year loan. So we like to say we're kind of optimistic at Second Street. But in the States, age discrimination in lending is not legal, and so that's not something that we do either.
Okay. Now, what type of properties can you lend on? I'm hearing that you can lend on homes and condos. How about something that's under construction? Do you do any construction loans?
Yeah, so at the moment, we don't do construction loans or loans against lots.
Okay.
It needs to be a completed residential property.
Okay.
But what I will say is for a pre-sale, we do have solutions where we can work with the developer on a pre-sale.
Okay.
So generally for a pre-sale, your clients, I mean, your client's going to have to put some amount of money down prior to completion of the property and some amount after. The way Second Street can help you borrow for a pre-sale is, of course, any funds due to the developer before construction, the client will have to pay. But Second Street can step in at the end, make the final payment to the developer, and then cash out anything additional back to the client up to a 70% LTV.
Yep.
So we make it pretty easy to work with pre-sales.
So I have some projects where the buyers pay 30% or more throughout the construction process, and you can come in at the end and finance the final balance.
Exactly. Okay. So, if we were to talk about an example where, let's say, your client has to put down a 50% deposit up front, and then they owe another 50% when the property is complete, but let's say they want to get a 70% loan. Your client will make the first 50% deposit, and then at closing, when the other 50 is due, Second Street will come in and pay that, and then will cash out an additional 20% back to your client.
Got it.
So your client ends up at completion with a 70% loan, 30% down.
Okay. Do you have a minimum loan amount that you'll finance a client?
Yes. So right now our minimum loan amount is $200,000.
Okay.
And so if you do the math at a 70% LTV, it means that the sort of smallest property value we'll lend it on right now is about $285,000.
Okay.
Because that's where $200,000 would be at a 70%
Perfect.
LTV.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Awesome.
Awesome.
So Second Street, we've partnered with them. Our network has been already closing deals with them. And we think that they could be a complete game changer for our business here in Costa Rica, making financing easy and accessible with 30-year terms, with competitive interest rates and no prepayment penalties. So we're really excited to work with Second Street. If you'd like to have more information about their loan programs, contact us and we'll have the details about their company down in the links below.